Today I have an evil plan to teach you how to make your own procedural stylized base material that you can save as an asset and then use on anything in Blender and any project in Blender. Remember this? You get one and you get one and you get one. And not only will I teach you how to make the material and save it as an asset, I'll teach you how to model a low poly rock and then use our base material to turn it into a finished product fairly quickly. And the best part is, you don't need this, you just need this. This is Ucupaint, the amazing free add-on by Ucupaint. It enables us to texture paint with layers in Blender, which is amazing. If you'd like some help installing it, learning the basics, check out this video where I go over all of that and we learn to make this cute little Voltorb. Now, if this video helps you out or you like the content, smash like and subscribe so I can make more. You can grab the blend file with this material and real-time video of me making it on my Patreon. Material creation! Okay, to start this project, all we need is a UV sphere. So let's add one by pressing Shift-A, going to Mesh, and selecting UV Sphere. I'm also going to right-click on the sphere and select Shade Smooth. So let's select our UV sphere and switch to texture painting mode. You may notice this tool bulletin error down at the bottom. All that means is that we don't have a texture painting tool selected. So go to the left side tool panel and select the draw brush. And just a heads up, for the sake of time, I'll only call out an action, like adding a new layer, with an arrow the first time I do it, since every time afterward, the process will be identical. Next, we'll find our Ucupaint panel on the right. Remember to press N if you can't see this panel, and we'll click on Quick Ucupaint Node Setup. This time for the type, we're going to select Emission and press OK. Selecting Emission as our shader type means that the layers we create will be visible even if there's no light in our scene, which is fairly common for this style. Let's add a new layer by clicking this plus icon, then selecting Solid Color. I'm going to pick a fairly dark and desaturated blue, something like this maybe? Yeah. And I'll switch to Material Preview mode by holding Z and dragging down so we can see our layers. I'll also shut off some of these overlays for a clearer view. Okay, let's go back to the Add Layer button and add a new solid color layer. I'll pick the same color, just a little bit lighter, and press OK. Now, we need to talk about masks. Alright, to explain what masks do, I'm going to open up a new Krita file and add a red paint layer. Now I'm going to use the magic of masks to make part of this red layer disappear so we can see the white background underneath. To do that, I'll navigate to the plus sign, and I'll select Add Transparency Mask. This type of mask works exactly the same way as the ones we'll be using in Blender, so it's a good example. Next, I'm going to go up to the color wheel, and I'll change my color to fully black, because drawing on my mask with 100% black will hide 100% of the red pixels. This is because drawing black on my mask tells the program I want to hide that part of this layer. By leaving the mask white, I'm telling the program I want this part of the layer to be shown. And masks work with gray values in between black and white, so you can get different opacities. To make this as clear as possible, I'm going to add a new layer underneath our red layer. I'm going to make it a light blue color, and then I will turn the red layer back on. And you'll see that the mask on our red layer is making it so that the area I drew in black is revealing the blue layer underneath. So basically, masks allow us to choose what we want to show and what we want to hide between layers. Now we took that detour about masks so that you'll understand what we're going to do next. Let's add a new mask to this layer by navigating to the Add Mask button and taking a look at the Generated Masks section. Generated masks are procedural, meaning you can change them at any time. And because we can change the way that they're mapped, we don't need to rely on UVs for them to work. And this is exactly why you can use this as a base material on any object. Because the material is using generated maps, it references the geometry and its position to know where to map the texture rather than the UVs. So from the generated masks list, let's select the Musgrave texture. The vector option is what allows us to choose the type of mapping we want to use. Since we don't want to use UVs, we're going to switch it to object. When we press OK, you'll see that some of our lighter layer is showing through while parts of it are hidden. Next, I'm going to add a ramp. A ramp allows us to fine-tune where the white and the black are on the mask, and you'll see that in a second. Get used to adding these because we'll be using them a lot. And as I play with the sliders on this ramp, you can see how the texture on our sphere is changing. And here's where we close the loop on our mask example from earlier. I'm going to select my mask. If I go to the preview options and select specific mask or override from the drop-down, and then click on the preview button, we can see what our mask looks like. Where the black is, we see the darker layer underneath, and where the gray and white are, we see the lighter color of our current layer, exactly like we saw in Krita. And this will also further exemplify how the ramp is changing our mask. Now let's exit preview mode and play around with our layer a bit. We can change the scale of our Musgrave texture by opening the source dialog and adjusting the scale value. This will change how large the noise appears on our texture. I'd like this layer to be darker to imitate indentations, so I'm going to change the blend mode to multiply and adjust the opacity some. When it's dialed in, it starts to look like pockmarks in stone. Next, I'll add another solid color layer and change the color a little. I'll add a mask to this layer, but this time I'll select Voronoi and double check that the vector is set to object. I'll tweak the scale a little bit. set the blend mode to multiply, and increase the opacity. Just like before, I'll add a ramp for some finer control of our mask. I'm going to play with the slider until it looks like I have some big rock cracks. Then I'll fine tune the color to look like shadow. Okay, that's looking good. I want another layer just like this one, but rather than remaking it from scratch, I'll go to the layer options and select duplicate layer. This will create an exact copy of this layer that we can tweak. I want the exact same layer because I need to tighten up the cracks and make them a little darker to simulate deeper recesses, which I can do with the ramp and the opacity. Once again, I'm going to duplicate the layer and I'll set it to a lighter color so I can see what I'm doing. I'll set the blend mode to mix because I want to add light instead of shadows. And right now the light color is where the cracks are, but I can flip the toggles on the ramp to invert the mask, forcing the light color to be outside the cracks. This will let me brighten up the parts of the rocks that aren't in the cracks. For the next little bit, I'll just be using the tools we've already covered to tweak the layers until I'm happy, so I'm going to speed it up a bit. I've included timestamps if you want to skip to when we do something new. You can follow what I'm doing step by step if you like, but I also encourage you to experiment and see what you can create, because that's the best way for us to learn. Alright, I'll be back when we're taking a new step. Time-lapse! Alright, I should probably point out that it's really easy to rename your layers, just double click them in the layer stack. Now I'm going to make a new layer strictly for color variation, which is really important when you're doing stylized stuff. It's something that's often overlooked by beginners and it adds a lot of visual interest to your texture. And I'll do this on more than one layer to build up a nice rich body of color. Once again, we're only using tools that I've already shown you, so I'm going to speed up the footage a little bit, and I'll have a timestamp for when we're done tweaking. Alright, we are going to do something new on this next layer. I'm going to add a new solid color layer and I'm going to make it green because I want to add some moss on top of this stone. As usual, we're going to add a mask, but this time we're going to select gradient, and I'll make sure that the vector is set to object. Then I'll open the mask options, navigate to vector, and under rotation, select the middle option. I want our moss to appear on top of our stone, so I need to rotate it by 90 degrees on the y-axis. In Blender, the axes are always presented from top to bottom as x, y, z. So to rotate our gradient by 90 degrees on the y-axis, I'll select the middle one, which is the y, and type in 90. Now that our gradient is oriented in the correct direction, we can add another mask to it to get some mossy texture. And it's important for me to point out here that masks are cumulative. Right now, we have one mask, this gradient, that's allowing the green to show through on top. When I add another mask to this, it'll add its effects onto the mask that's already there. And I'll show you what I mean. Watch what happens when I add a new Musgrave mask under the gradient mask. As you can see, the gradient is still applied because our moss is only showing up on top. In addition to that, the Musgrave mask is blocking out noisy chunks of our moss, which will help lend it some mossy texture. Stacking and modifying these masks is how we achieve procedural textures. And now that I've shown you how the gradient works, I'm going to go back to tweaking until I'm happy. This is a time-consuming process, and I'm going to jump back and forth between the layers a bunch, so I'm going to speed the footage up. But again, there will be timestamps for when we do something new. Okay, I think I'm happy with the base material as it is. In order to save this base material as an asset for later use, we need to go to the Material Properties tab and give it a name. It's best to be descriptive so you know what it is later. Then we can right-click the material and select Mark as Asset. In order for this to work and actually save our material though, you need to have a folder set up for your asset library. You can assign a folder for this by navigating to Edit, Preferences, File Paths, and locating the Asset Libraries directory. To add a folder to the asset directory, click this plus icon and choose the folder you want to use. Then go to the Preferences option and save Preferences. Now this is important, very important, because the way Blender handles assets is kind of weird. The only way to save something as an asset is to save the project's blend file in the folder you just assigned. Saving the blend file to your asset library folder lets Blender find things that you have marked as an asset, like we did with our material a moment ago. So I'll go to File, Save As, navigate to my Blender Resources library folder, because that's where I keep all of my assets, and save the blend file there. Now, because I marked the material as an asset, and I've saved the blend file to the correct asset folder, I can use this material on anything I want in the future. One caveat though, Blender's asset library is still a little buggy and has prevented me from reopening some files, so I'll teach you another way to access your material. A special thanks to Arsa for solving this problem for me. Start a brand new file, then go to File, Append, navigate to the blend file with your material and double click it, then navigate to Materials and select your material. It'll now be available in your current Blender file. This is why it's important to save often. As long as you save your blend file, it'll be easily recoverable. To show you how this works, I'll start a brand new blend file, and I'll use Blender's built-in rock generator to make a rock. If you don't see rock generator in your mesh list, it's included by default in Blender. So just go to the add-ons options, search for Add Mesh Extra Objects, and enable it. This will also enable a host of other interesting meshes, so it's fun to play around with. To add a rock, I'll hit Shift-A, go to Mesh, go to Rock Generator, and the basic rock will work for our purposes. So I'm just going to click in the viewport to confirm. By default, it'll have a lot of modifiers turned on, which you can see, and I want to apply all of those at once. To do that, I'll navigate to Object, Apply, and select Visual Geometry to Mesh. Next, I'll drag up from the bottom left of the viewport, go to the Window selector, navigate to Asset Browser. From the list on the left, I'll select the folder where I keep my assets. In my case, it's my Blender Resource Library. And then I'll find the material I just saved. I will drag and drop it onto the rock and then switch to Material Preview mode. And voila, our texture is applied to the rock. Now I'll show you why procedural textures are so cool. I'm going to go into Sculpt mode and make changes to this mesh, and you'll see that the texture updates in real time. I can do any kind of sculpting or modeling operation to this, and it'll still map the texture this way. And what's even cooler than that is that all of these layers are still completely editable. Nothing is set in stone yet. Here's an example of me changing the colors on a scene I threw together very quickly. Now you should learn how to use this base material on a project from start to finish. For this, we're going to need to model a low poly rock. Low poly rock! Let's add a cube by hitting Shift-A, going to Mesh, and selecting Cube. Select the cube and go into Edit mode. Hit 3 on your keyboard, not your numpad, to go into Face Select mode, or hit this button. I'm going to make some basic adjustments to make this more rock-like. I'll select the bottom face, then I'll hit E to extrude the face. By default, the extrusion will go in the same direction as the face's normal. Right. We should talk about normals. I tried to think of a very simple way to explain a face normal, and the best I could come up with is this. A face normal is the direction the face is looking. Like, imagine the face had eyes that could only look straight forward, like this. It would be looking in this direction. The actual definition of a face normal is the axis exactly perpendicular to the plane of the face. And you can visualize these for your object by selecting the object, going into Edit mode, navigating to the Mesh Edit mode Overlays options, and selecting Display Normals. To get a better picture, we can increase the size of the normal display. All that to say that when we hit E to extrude on this bottom face, it'll extrude along the path it's facing. Now I'm going to make sure I'm in edit mode, then I'm going to hit A to select all. I'll hit S to scale, and then Z to constrain that scale to the Z axis. I'll select the bottom face and scale it up just a little bit by pressing S to scale and then moving my mouse to the right. Then I'll hit E to extrude and bring it down a little bit. I'll select the bottom face again and scale it down just a bit, and that's good. Now that I've made the basic shape of my rock, it's time to do some rock carving. So let's go over to our toolbar and find the knife tool. Any one of these tools that has this tiny triangle has more than one mode, so you can hold in your mouse click to bring up more tools. So let's click the knife tool and hold it for a second until you see this panel pop up. We want to pick the Bisect tool for our rock carving. The Bisect tool uses a plane to cut objects and split them apart, something like this. In order to use the Bisect tool, we need to make sure that our entire object is selected every time we want to make a cut. The selection mode, vertex, edge, or face, doesn't matter. Just make sure you hit A to select your entire object every single time you want to make a cut. Next, we want to drag out a line where we want to cut away the rock. Drag from the outside and then through the rock, like so, and once you do, a few things will happen. You'll notice this blue circle with an arrow appears. This is important because it shows us the front of our cutting plane. You'll also notice the Bisect tool context menu appear, and this is where we will decide how we want to cut our rock. Knowing where the front of our cutting plane is matters because of these options. For our purposes, we always want fill checked. This just fills in the cut we made. If we don't fill it in, it looks like this. So just make sure to check fill every time. Clear inner will remove geometry behind the plane, meaning on the side opposite of the arrow. Clear outer will remove geometry on the same side as the arrow. It helps me to think of the cutting plane like a lid for a pot. I can cut what's under the lid and inside the pot using clear inner, and I can cut what's above the lid with clear outer. I don't know if that explanation is actually going to help anybody. But give me a break, I'm a giant gemstone. Now we just go around our object making cuts until we're happy with the final look. I'm just using clear inner and clear outer and always keeping it filled. And it's totally fine if your rock looks different from mine, just play around with it until you're happy. And to get it where I want it, it takes a minute, so I'll speed it up just a little bit. And voila, we've made a very fast, super low poly, stylized rock. Now we can drag and drop the material we made earlier directly onto this low poly rock and it'll work just fine with all of our procedural layers intact and no need for UVs. But if we want to customize this particular rock, we'll want to take advantage of Ucupaint's baking tools. And for that, we need UVs. We could just go into edit mode, select all by pressing A, hit U on our keyboard and select Smart UV Project, and that would work just fine. But we have some wonky faces on our mesh. Generally speaking, we want quads when we're modeling, so that we get clean shading results and can animate more easily. You'll notice, however, that we have some faces with 5 or more vertices, which could lead to shading and painting problems down the road. And I'll probably go over ways to properly fix topology in another video. But today we're going to use a quick trick to get Blender to do the heavy lifting for us. I'll show you what I mean. If we go into edit mode, we can see that right now our faces have all sorts of different vertex counts. This one has 5, this one has a billion, oof. So let's go back into object mode, select our rock, then go to the modifiers tab, click add modifier, select search and type in triangulate. Select it and click apply. When we go back into edit mode, we can see that all of our faces have been turned into triangles. And honestly, you could just UV unwrap this and use it for the kind of painting we're going to do, since we're not planning to animate anything. But if you do want quads, you can hit A on your keyboard to select all, then go to face and select tries to quads, and boom, we have quads. There'll probably be some triangles left over that Blender couldn't resolve, but that's totally fine. A few are okay. Now let's get Blender to unwrap our UVs. Once again, make sure everything is selected by pressing A on your keyboard, then hit U to bring up the UV context menu. Select Smart UV Project, set the island margin to 0.01, and then select OK. If we go to our UV editing workspace and click on the right viewport, then hit A to select all again, we can see how Blender has unwrapped our UVs. These aren't great UVs, but they'll work for what we want to do. And now we need to talk about fake maps. Unlike generative masks, which use geometry and position for mapping, baked images rely on UV data to know where to map the texture. Here's an example of a baked image we're going to use as a mask to highlight the edges of our rock. Notice how the white part of the mask follows the edges on our UVs. Baking one of these maps creates an image that is mapped to our UVs like you can see here, which means the image is locked to the current shape of our object. We can't adjust its scale or pattern like we did with procedural masks. However, because baking produced an image, we can use the regular texture painting tools to modify that image to our liking. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. First, let's select our low poly rock. Then let's apply the procedural material we created earlier to it by going to the Material Properties tab, clicking the Materials List button, and selecting our material. If you've made the rock in a different Blender file, just append it like I showed you earlier. Now let's go into Material Preview mode and we can see the texture on our object. Let's quickly make a duplicate of this material and give it a unique name so that we don't confuse it with our base material. To do that, go to the Material Properties tab, make sure the material is selected, and then select the New Material button. This will make a duplicate of the material with the suffix .001. Double-click it and give it a name that fits your object. You'll notice that a red button has appeared on our Ucupaint interface that says Fix Multi-User Ucupaint Node. Click it and select OK. Now we have a unique version of the material that we can use to finish our rock. We want a unique material for our rock because if we make changes to the base material itself, it will apply to all objects that have the base material applied to it, like in this clip from earlier. Okay, so we have a unique version of our material applied to our rock. The scale looks a little funny though, and there's two ways that we can change our base material to better fit our object. The first, and faster way, is to edit the scale and position of our rock in edit mode. Remember that procedural maps rely on geometry and position data to know where to map the texture. That means if we change the geometry or position data, the texture will look different. We need to make these changes in edit mode though, because if we make them in object mode, like so, we are only changing what we see in the viewport. To change the actual geometry and position data, we need to be in edit mode. So let's go into edit mode, hit A to select all, and change the size of our rock. Notice that once again the texture is changing in real time. This works for the scale of our rock, as well as the position in the X, Y, and Z axes. So let's shrink our rock by hitting A to select all, then hitting S and moving our mouse to the left until the texture looks more fitting. There we go. Once again, let's make sure the entire object is selected by hitting A on our keyboard, then move it upward by hitting G to move, followed by Z to move it in the vertical. Notice that as we move our rock up, we're getting more moss. You can use this method to tweak the look of your object to your liking before committing to any bakes. The second second method to tweak our base material, and the one I'll show you here, is to modify the procedural maps in the layer stack just like we did when we were creating it. I'll speed this part up while I tweak these because we've done this already. Now I want to add some highlights to the edges of our rock, but I want them to lie underneath the moss. So I'll select the layer underneath where the moss layers are, in my case it's a color variation 2, and I'll add a new solid color layer. I'm going to pick the light stone color for now, but we can also change the color later. I'll let that load in, and then I'll go to the Add Mask section. And it's here that we take our first foray into baking. We're going to use the Bevel Grayscale Bake option to help us highlight the edges of our low poly rock. We can use this baking option to highlight our edges because the Bevel Grayscale option calculates changes in the relative angles between planes and creates an image that shows where those changes in angle take place. So let's select Bevel Grayscale from the list. Now most of these settings are fine, but because we're going to want to smooth and blur the resulting image using our texture painting tools, we want a bit more resolution to our baked image. So let's set the image size to 2048 by 2048, leave everything else as is, and press OK. It'll take a moment for it to update since it's now processing a 2K image and calculating where the edges are on our rock. Once it's done, you can see that the light color of our current layer is being shown where the edges are. Congrats! You just made your first baked map. I'm going to add a ramp to it quickly, and we'll come back to that in a sec. I'll go into our UV editing workspace once again, then go to the window selector on the left side and change it to the image editor. Then, to see the image we just baked, I'll go to the image selection option, and I'll select the one named Bevel Grayscale. Now we can see the mask image that was created when we baked the Bevel Grayscale map. The white shows the changes in angle I mentioned earlier. And like all the other masks we've used, the black areas hide our current layer, and the white areas let it show through, which is why the lighter color is appearing on our edges. Now let's go back to our layout tab, and I'm going to slide the white slider on our ramp to the left to widen these edges out. And I'll set the blend mode to screen, which will result in a brighter image. And I'll turn down the opacity. Now these edge highlights won't do it all as they are. They are nowhere near subtle enough. To fix that, I'm going to use the texture painting tools to blur and smudge them into submission. So I'll switch to texture painting mode, select the blur tool, bring the brush size down to avoid lag. The blur brush is always laggy for everyone because it's making a lot of calculations. So a smaller brush is better when you can manage it. And I'll start blurring all of the edges. I'll speed this up since I'm only going to blur for the next little bit. I want to blur the top as well, but I can't see it. So I'll go to the visibility options for the moss layers and shut them off. You can do this quickly by clicking and dragging over them too, like this. Then I'll resume blurring. Might look a bit crap right now, but a bit of smudging will go a long way. So once they're all blurred, I'll switch to the smudge tool and reduce the strength a bit by holding Shift and F and dragging my mouse to the left. Somewhere around 30% should be good. And I'll start smudging the lines until they almost disappear. I'm going to do this for the whole rock, so I'll speed it up once again. Once I'm done smudging, I'm going to change the color to something a little more fitting. We can still change the color even though we used a baked mask in UVs because we're using the baked image as a mask. And the color of the layer that we are letting come through that mask is still adjustable. Very handy. And I'll tweak the opacity a little bit more as well. Now, as I toggle this layer on and off, you'll see that it's not much of an effect, but it does add a little more definition and variation, which is good. Once I'm satisfied, I'll turn back on the moss layers. And now for the finishing touches. It's common to add saturated gradients that simulate lighting to stylized objects. So let's do that. To do this, we're going to use the same gradient tools we used when we first made the material. Let's start with the shadow on the bottom. Once again, I want this layer underneath the moss layers, so I'll add a new solid color layer underneath them using the purple rock color. I'll set the blend mode to multiply, then add a gradient mask just like before, making sure that the vector is set to object. The only difference is that this time, I want the shadow gradient to be on the bottom of my object, so I'll change the gradient's rotation value on the y-axis to -90, and it'll cover the bottom of my object. I want a nice smooth blend, so I'll go to the blur option, turn it on, and then set it to 100. Then I'll lower the opacity a bit until it looks a little better. It's a little high up, so I'm going to bring the x-axis offset down a little to position the gradient more towards the bottom of my rock. Then I'll tweak it until I'm happy by using those options. Finally, I want to add some fake sunlight, so I'll add a new solid color layer at the very top of my layer stack and set it to a bright yellow. I'll set the blend mode to overlay so that some of the color underneath still comes through. Once again, I want this gradient on the top of my object, so I'll rotate it on the y-axis by 90 degrees, blur it, and adjust the opacity and offset until it looks alright. And there we go. This one's good enough. And now for the final piece of the puzzle. We want to export this entire layer stack as a single texture that we can use for this rock if we want to use it in another file or bring it into a game engine. So here's how we export. To save out our texture for this rock, all we need to do is go to the Ucupaint special menu and click Bake All Channels. Once we do, the entire layer stack will be converted into a single image that's mapped to our rock's UVs. You can then save by hitting Ctrl S to save your file. Ucupaint automatically saves and packs images for us so we don't lose them. It's the best. Alternatively, you can go to the base color layer options and select Save Image to save it wherever you like. If we go back to our image editor in the UV editing workspace, we can see, oh my, our edges are looking rather rock-like. We can navigate to our exported image and see what it looks like. How cool is that? We're done! Well, that's it for this one. It was a wild ride. We covered a lot in this video, and I really hope it'll help you with your creative projects. All my love goes to my patrons, without whom I could not create these videos. Thank you so much for your support. And a huge thanks to the Deuces Club members who always stick around to the end of my videos. If you're still here, then you're in the club. So comment Deuces down below, and I'll add you to the members list that I pin to each and every video. I hope this helps you make some cool stuff, and I will see you in the next one. Deuces.